Hey there, and welcome to Undoing We, Divorce and Life Conversations on WGSN-DB Going Solo Network, radio, podcast, and TV. I'm your host, Mardi Winder-Adams. I'm a divorce coach, a mediator, and someone who's been through exactly what you're going through. This show is all about helping you get through the tough stuff, the overwhelm of divorce, the what now moments, and the messiness of trying to rebuild your life. We're going to talk about real life challenges, share expert advice, and give you practical tools you can use to move forward with your life. Are you ready to start shifting from we to me? Grab a coffee, sit back, and let's get started. Hello, and so happy to have you here on this episode of Undoing We. And I get a chance to go back over an interview that just happened like very recently, where I was talking to Maria Riegger. She is a corporate attorney who also does an amazing job working with parents who want to improve their parenting skills through a process she calls reparenting themselves, and also learning how to interact with children, and specifically kids that are older teens, although it starts when they're young, we know that as parents, to really build strong relationships with clear boundaries and to break free from that compulsion or need or feeling like we all need to be helicopter parents and we need to be constantly protecting our kids from any kind of boredom, frustration, anger. Maria takes a really, I think, honest and authentic look at how, as parents, we can allow our kids to have autonomy at an age-appropriate level and how that's really going to help them develop into strong individuals and how it's going to improve the parent-child relationship, which we know only gets more difficult as kids move from little ones into the tween years, and then finally into the teen years. So I can't wait to listen again to this amazing interview I had with my friend, Maria Riegger. And then at the end, I'm going to summarize a few of the key points that I think are just interesting things to keep in mind as parents moving forward. You know, what I see is parents who are so stressed right now. Of course, most of the people I work with are very high achieving men and women, but who are struggling with trying to be perfect at work, trying to be, thought leaders and industry leaders and corporate executives and all the other things they're trying to do. And they're really drained. And then they come home and their relationship isn't great with their kids, especially as their kids get a little older, the relationship gets even worse. And then they don't feel good at work and they don't feel good at home and their relationship is falling apart. And it's just like, all the things are happening at once. So I know that you work with a lot of high achieving people as well. Do you think this is specific? Is it kind of specific to this group, or is it just that we notice it more?
I think probably both, because everything is, we're so much more interconnected now with social media, and we see what's happening with other people's lives, right? So it's normal that we compare our lives with theirs, right? So that's one thing. I think there's a lot of pressure on parents. There's a lot of pressure on women, on moms especially. And for those of us who, I'm in the DC area, it's a very competitive area, a high achieving area. There's a lot of pressure on parents to make sure their kids do all the activities, get the grades to get in the right colleges. So to actually make a conscious decision that you're not going to focus on those, I call them more ego-oriented pursuits, that's very powerful. It takes a really strong, secure parent to do that, to make the decision that I'm going to focus on other things. Also, because you mentioned older kids, it's tough because when kids become those tween teen ages, they need the parents. They still need the parents. Arguably, they need the parents around more than when they were elementary schoolers. And that's something that parents don't necessarily realize. I didn't a long time ago. My son is almost 16, and I, made the decision several years ago that I could not focus full effort on like my day job, my professional pursuits, and focus full effort at the time on parenting.
Yeah.
So I made the decision. I had him, he needs me. I'm going to put my effort there first, and then secondarily put effort into other things. So you have to make conscious decisions about that. Otherwise, it's like you say, parents are stretched so thin, nothing is done to completion, or nothing is done well enough in their mind. So you really have to make decisions about where you're going to focus your energy. And it could just be, this season, I'm going to focus on the kids, or this season, I'm going to focus on this professional project. I'm not saying that that has to be the rest of your life,
Right.
that focus the rest of your life, but we do have to make conscious decisions about that. That's one of the things I work with parents on, because I tell them, look, if you don't make decisions about where to focus your time and energy, other people make it for you, make those decisions for you by default.
Yeah.
You have to be intentional. Not everybody likes that word, but you have to make decisions, intentional decisions about where to focus your energy, for
Well,
sure.
and I think this is so important. And, it's interesting. I was just talking to Kate Kripke, and she's a psychologist. She deals with motherhood, with women. And one of the things that she's saying is there's such a, like, social media does this, right? We think that we need to be these helicopter and snowplow and all these other descriptors for parents. Like, you have to be on top of your kids 24/7 or you're a bad parent. And, so I get you want your kids to be safe. I'm not suggesting, you can let your kids go run the streets. That's not what I'm saying. But it's funny when you said you grew up and you could go out in the woods. I grew up on a farm. We used to literally take horses with the neighbor kids and sandwiches, and it would be like, be back by dark. And I'm not saying anybody needs to do that, because, thankfully nothing bad happened. I mean, there was
Right.
potential, right? But there's potential for bad things to happen, even if mom and dad are standing right beside the child. So do you think that that adds pressure to these parents?
Absolutely. Yeah, and overparenting can be a real problem. Overparenting, helicopter parenting. And it's funny, I read somewhere recently that parents, they're not involved, and generally speaking, not involved enough in the kids' online activity. And it's almost like, regarding the non-online activities in every other area of life, they helicopter to try to kind of make up for that. But that's not the right approach. We certainly need to be involved in what kids are doing online. I have a teen son, let me tell you, there have to be checks and balances. There have to be frank discussions, parental controls, all that stuff. But kids need the freedom as they get older. They need the freedom to make their own decisions and make their mistakes. Independent support, autonomy support is a developmental need that older children have.
Yeah.
And there is definitely, I see a trend, and this has been going on for a while, of parents wanting, especially moms, wanting to save the kids from making mistakes. Why? I tell parents it's better the kids make mistakes when they're living at home with you and have ready access to guidance and support from parents. They learn, at least they have the experience of learning from the mistakes, going through the natural consequences.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's definitely something to be said for that. Allowing them to practice decision making. That's something you have to practice. You don't just get great at making the best decisions, or setting boundaries. You have to practice boundary setting. Support with boundary setting is another developmental need that older kids have.
Right.
So yeah, all those things really important.
And I think one of the things that I want to kind of swing this around, because I think this is such an interesting idea. Talk about this idea of reparenting your inner child, because I think what we're talking about are techniques and strategies that parents need to have. But if you don't have them internally and you can't do them yourself, you really can't help your child to learn them either.
Exactly. That's precisely why I got the coaching certification, because it's hard to teach your kids, for example, healthy boundaries if you have poor boundaries yourself. So the reparenting protocols, it's, as we kind of mentioned earlier, series of protocols to help the client meet the developmental needs that they did not get met in childhood. And sometimes it's maybe a couple developmental needs that didn't get met, or if they had a very traumatic, abusive childhood, it could be a bunch of stuff they didn't get met. So we almost always start with using that observer self technique to try to help you detach. Because a lot of parents, what happens is we get triggered by our kids' developmentally appropriate behavior, and that's our issue to deal with. And if you are too close, if you are not detached enough to really consider the behavior, you're just going to keep getting triggered, right? So we want to use we have different protocols we can put in place to help the client become more detached, to use that observer technique. We want the parent to get curious about the kid's behavior and explore it from this place of more clinical detachment and curiosity. Like, this is interesting. Like, they're upset about this. What is happening here? Because as you and I have talked about this before, all behavior from kids is communication. Kids don't come and tell you, hey, I'm feeling very disconnected from you, or I'm angry because this happened. They're going to engage in this behavior, and the parent's going to, it helps if you can be curious about what is going on here instead of they're misbehaving.
Right.
So that being more of an observer instead of triggered by the action is very helpful. And that it's very powerful once you realize that you've embraced that observer self. Because you see behavior more clearly. You can see patterns, you can anticipate, you can have more autonomy about your own behavior and your response to your kids' behavior. So it's hard to do the rest of the work without mastering that first.
And I know that you and I are both trained in NLP. And one of the factors in NLP is that all behavior serves a purpose. And people are using the behavior because it's helping them. Whether you're looking at it and going, this isn't helping me, that doesn't matter as the parent. The child is doing it because whatever they're doing is getting them whatever they want, which may very well be your attention, however they can get it.
Absolutely. I talked to an adult recently, and we were talking about our childhoods, and she told me in high school, I purposely failed an English class to get my dad's attention. She goes, I did all the work, I just didn't turn it in.
Right.
That's an example of using the negative behavior to try to get some attention, right? Because
Right.
kids, even teenagers, won't necessarily go and tell you. They may, but they may not. I'm having a tough time. They'll engage in some behavior, and the parent has to kind of be a detective sometime and figure out, hey, is this going on or this going on? And you always need to, make sure that the kids know that you are available. That's why I tell parents of teens, you need to make sure somebody is available. They don't
Right.
need to be helicoptered over, but when they want to talk, you need to be physically and emotionally available for them. Somebody has to be.
And if most kids want to talk, and I've said this on a bunch of podcasts, when you're trying to get out the door in the morning, when they're already late for something, or when you're really, really busy and trying to get some project finished or something, that's what they want to
Yeah. Or you're going to sleep. That's me. I'm in bed with my book and my kid wants to chat. And that's fine. I'm like, hey, let's chat. That's cool. You have to really take advantage of those moments.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to. And if you're late to some event, but it's because you had this really important conversation, be late to the event. Because if you're not, if you dismiss the bid for connection, you're going to miss very valuable information,
Right.
that will help you with the relationship.
Well, and I also think, if a child reaches out and gets shut down, maybe once they're going to, or gets criticized or gets told, we can't do this, they may be okay with that. But if it starts happening like 2 or 3 times, they just go like, well, what the heck? I'm not even
Right.
going to bother going. So if they don't
Right.
go to the parent, who do they go to? Right. Probably
Right.
somebody you don't want them going to. So,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
so Maria, I really like this idea of the observer a self technique. What, how do you get started? Like, what kind of mindset or what shift in perception do parents need to focus on to do that? Because it sounds easy, just, yeah, I get curious. But
Yeah.
when kids do
Yeah.
something, we get triggered ourselves, right? So
Right.
how do we
Right.
deal with all of that?
Right. The first thing I like to recommend is to get some physical distance. Physical distance, but also mental distance. You can think about it in terms of we could use like a bubble technique. Like, you are in a protective bubble. One of my friends uses the visualization of in a sleeping bag. She zips up a sleeping bag and feels more protected, right, from the other person's energy, from the other person's big emotions. I like to get physical distance. I'm going to go to another room. I'm going to use the bathroom. Perfect excuse, right?
Right.
Things like that. It's also helpful if you're having a tough conversation on the phone because of the distance. Some people get triggered. Like I used to get triggered when there's in person, the conversation is taking place in person. Being on the phone is a great technique to use in the beginning. You may not be able to do this with your kids necessarily, but you may be able to do this with like an intrusive relative or somebody you're
Sure.
trying to have better boundaries with. On the phone, it's easier to kind of maintain those boundaries because they're not there in front of you, right? And you can escape. So that's kind of one of the first things I mentioned, is to try to figure out how to put distance, whether it's just a step back, we have in NLP, we have something called the dissociative technique, which I like to use the term detachment, but you literally take a step back and you're putting some physical distance between you and yourself and the person or the situation.
Right.
So yeah, that's something, those are some visualizations, some ideas it may help.
And here's the thing I find. So yes, the NLP I like, but I also did, I was a trainer for critical incident stuff for the Crisis Management Institute. And so one of the things that people do as an adult, when we want kids to do something and kids are starting to get angry with us, we step into them. Like we make our physical presence, we use our physicality to sort of, become this, I don't want to say bully, but it's sort of like that whole idea of being a bully, right? You're bigger, you're stronger, so this kid's going to do what I say. And that is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. You should be stepping back, especially if your kid's getting angry, because the closer you get, the more that fight or flight response is going to kick in for the kid, right? So you can quickly escalate a situation by stepping in. Especially, even a child, they need to have their space.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And some kids more than others. And then what happens, the kids get older, and then you have an adult-sized kid, like my son is taller, way taller than me, and you're teaching them behavior, and you may see them engage in that behavior with you, because now they're bigger than you. So you definitely don't want to be doing that, right? Yeah, and when kids are oppositional, there are different ways you can handle that. One thing I like to say is, hey, you need to do this. No, why not? Just ask what's up with you not wanting to do this? And you may get some valuable information. Well, because I'm doing this right now. Okay, when would you be a good time to do this? Later. Later is not going to work, because I've noticed when you say later, it usually doesn't happen. Please tell me a time you're going to do this. I'll do it at 3. Okay. What I've noticed is they're much more willing to do it if they have some input. That's just the one example of how to engage with them. So it's not about how do I get my kid to do this. It's like, how do I have the relationship where my kid wants to cooperate with me? And that doesn't mean they're going to hop to every time you tell them to do something. But part of that relationship work and learning how to be in relationships and learning how to teach your kid to be in a healthy relationship is to model that behavior for them, is to engage in the back and forth, the one-on-one discourse, negotiation when it's appropriate, the compromise. This is all important stuff. So there may be things you're not willing to compromise on. You need to make those decisions, but other things you may be able to compromise.
Well, I'm sure you found some things that give you a little bit of things to think about in how you're parenting. And remember, this is good for anybody who's parenting kids, but it becomes really critical, I think, during divorce, as Maria was and is a single parent raising a teen. And she recognizes that there are some challenges in doing that in a single parent home as opposed to a dual parent home. But a couple of key takeaways that I think are so relevant and so important is, number one, that as a parent, you really have to decide where you want to spend your energy and time with your kids, and what are the little things that you can let go. I love Maria's example of giving kids some chances, some choices, some opportunities to consider how they want to do things. We've all been kids. We know we didn't like it when our parents told us what we had to do. And so I think that idea of, asking kids, well, if you don't want to clean your room today or right now, when are you going to do it? And so giving them some flexibility and some autonomy and agency over their own lives, but also making sure that there are limitations, because we know as parents, we've all done this before and said, well, when would you like to do it? Or do it when you can. And somehow those things never, ever seem to get done. So I think that was a great strategy to implement. Number two, I think this idea of self as observer is such a powerful tool for us as parents. When we feel ourselves starting to get into that mode of, why don't these kids listen to us? What's wrong with them? And going into ourselves and assuming that we understand what's going on, to really just say, wow, as an observer, what's going on here? Stepping back, both mentally and physically, and getting curious and thinking, I wonder what purpose this is serving for the kids. And or the child. And I think that that is really helpful, because if you're able to determine what purpose that, I'm putting this in quotes, challenging behavior is serving for the kids, then the solution is right there. If the kids don't like feeling controlled, again, giving them some choices can help take that away. If the kids don't like the fact that they feel, especially in a divorce, like they have no say in things, giving them a little bit of say in things that's reasonable, appropriate, and that, doesn't infringe on any safety or concerns for the child is definitely something that we can all do as people. But we can't do it if we're so caught up in our own reactions that we can't take the time to actually get curious and observe what's really going on. And the last one I think is really important, and I say this to all my clients, is make sure that you have healthy boundaries for how you're going to deal with these life challenges. So knowing like what you will accept and what you won't accept, and being able to clearly articulate that to our kids helps them know where they can negotiate, where they can move around, and where those absolute boundaries are. And those boundaries are not just to keep people out, they're to make the great experience of interacting much more positive. And I think that idea of emotional availability, and let's face it, as parents, there have all been times when we've been really rushed, really in a hurry, and we just haven't had time to sit and talk to our kids when they needed to talk. So finding ways to be emotionally available when it also works for the child or the teen to be able to talk is really critical. So I hope this gave you some good parenting strategies that you can use, especially if you're dealing with kids that are in those, let's face it, difficult teenage years. Just remember, it's all a part of development and growing. You went through it. I went through it. We all got where we are today. And there are some ways that parents can make this easier for them, easier for their kids, and help to fuse that parent-child bond that's going to carry through and allow your kids to come back and ask you and talk to you when they're having problems. Thanks for sharing your time with me on Undoing We. If this episode resonated with you, be sure to share it with a friend, and don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. If you're looking for some more support, be sure to grab my guide, 5 Strategies for Better Communication During Divorce and Other Life Transitions. The link is going to be in the show notes. And remember, no matter what you do today, do something special for yourself.